This podcast contains potentially adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly sexual context. Listener discretion is advised. Okay, here we are, drinking with authors. Yay! The podcast. No, I am your host, Erica Lance. My co-host today is
J.M. Piquette.
Yay! And our guest today is Beth Patterson.
Hi, kids.
So, we're going to talk about what we're drinking today. But today, I have one of our Drinking with Authors shot glasses, and I'm going to have some honey jack. So that's going to happen. Jen, why don't you talk about what you're drinking?
I'm drinking La Croix, which is not very exciting, but I normally drink bubbly, so this is I'm trying a new thing. It's lime. We'll see if it's any good.
And to reiterate, Jen's allergic to alcohol, so she's boring. Moving on. Beth, what are you drinking?
Well, it's, there's no shame in not drinking alcohol. I've will sometimes refrain in front of people who are trying to quit themselves, but people who are going to be tuning into this are going to know that I'm going to be consuming some boozy booze. So this is from a winery called Field Recordings. I could not resist the fact that the label calls this particular brand Fiction. It's a blend. I like reds. I tend to gravitate towards Monastrell and Malbec and some Shiraz, of course, because I spent a great deal of time in Australia. This is a blend. It's I like to buy these if I know exactly what percentage is what, and it's just not the end result of somebody's wine tasting when so we've got 36% Zinfandel, 15% Cabernet Franc, 12% Mourvèdre, 12% Syrah. Something I didn't know until recently is that Shiraz and Syrah are pretty much the same grape. It just one is South African and one is Australian. 11% Cab Sauv, 5% Grenache, 5% Touriga Nacional, and 4% Alicante or Alicante. Sorry, I'm trying to learn. French was my first foreign language, and now I'm trying to teach myself Spanish. So there's no telling what is going to through what lens this is going to go through. But Alicante Boucher.
You are doing way better than us, and you just did a bunch of math, and that could be 130%, and I wouldn't know. I'd be like, cool, that sounds great.
I am kind of mathematically tone deaf, which is a hard thing for my family to accept because my father is a mathematician. He is retired from being the head of the math department at, it'll always be USL to me. It's now University of Louisiana Lafayette. It's
oh, wow.
ULL or ULALA, but it'll always be USL to me. And after a certain point in my learning, all of a sudden, something just went off the rails as far as my ability to process numbers. In the immortal words of Beavis and Butthead, there's too many of them and stuff. My grades did shoot up when I started drinking coffee in high school. I went from struggling to all of a sudden my Algebra 2 teacher saying, "Are you sure you don't want to take trig next year?" So I think that, having not knowing at the time that what I essentially had was raging ADD was part of it. But I didn't find out until I finished college.
No, exactly. Well, you said two things. One, I'm a huge Malbec fan. Like, that is my favorite red is a Malbec. But I will say that my default cheapy deepy brand, that's what I'm going to call it, is I drink 19 Crimes, because I don't know why, but their red blends are all like, I don't have a problem with a single one of them for whatever.
Yeah, and not only that, but if you get the app, it has the creep.
I have the talking app. I have it talk to me. Usually a couple glasses in, I have the will talk to me.
Yeah, it can, once you've had that much alcohol in you and then your wine label starts talking to you, what could possibly go wrong?
Nothing. We're writers. Nothing can go wrong. No, literally nothing can go wrong. Get it? Literally. You see how I did that? You impressed, Jen?
I do.
Jen's just sitting there going, this is already off the rails. So Beth, first of all, you are amazing and funny. So we're going to get into talking about this, but you actually inspired an immediate purchase of something by two people that I know. based on your commercial. So I'm just
Oh.
letting you know, but you're going to have to talk about a little bit about you, and then we're going to get into that. But Jen was one of the ones she saw, because I was like, she asked who we were talking to, and I'm like, oh, let me just show you the YouTube. And her and another one of our editors at Four Horsemen immediately bought your book the moment.
nice.
So
It was
mission
awesome.
accomplished.
Thank
And
you.
Fun.
This was Release the Virgins.
yeah,
Yes. That was
Yeah.
hysterical. I loved it.
Oh, thank you.
so
Yeah, I'll be happy to talk about that.
talk about your writing though, and because you're not just a writer, you're like such much larger story arc here. But start with your writing. So let's talk about your writing a little bit. What do you write for the fans out there that may not know you, which is dumb? They should
Well,
know you.
My favorite sort of narrative to write is speculative fiction with sort of a snarky twist to it. I like things to be a little quirky, definitely with some humor. Not all of it is like that though. That's just my preferred narrative and my preferred genre. I like trying different things and finding out, okay, well, that works. That was surprising. And okay, let's not ever do this again. It's part of learning who you are is learning who you're not. And I didn't start really trying to seriously start writing until about 9 years ago. I had dabbled with it, all through high school with, just random snippets of books that I was going to write someday and stretching into college and things like that. And then it started sort of um, a short time later, just sort of lay dormant, but not dead. And it wasn't until about 2012 that the bug bit me. I guess the way that some women reach the age that I had reached and say, oh my God, I have to have a baby. I was like, oh my God, I have to have a book.
Way less costly.
Yeah. Yeah, there's sort of things. For one thing, nobody is going to call the police if you throw your book out the window.
That is true. That is a very true
not,
story.
it's not important how I know this. I mean, I don't have any children, at least, none that I'm aware of. But I all of a sudden I started brainstorming and I looked back at some of the early things that I was writing and just some ideas. I was just grasping at straws. And of course, the ideas are kind of like wah, wah. But at least it was a start. And it's like my first vocation, which is music. When you go back and look at things and your earlier creations and cringe, that's actually a good thing because it shows how far you've come. That's what
Agreed.
one of the musical heroes in Ireland taught me.
Yeah, no, we're actually publishing a book right now called Teen Angst, and we asked everybody to send us their poetry, their love letters, like all of the. You can totally participate. You can totally participate. Yes, I'll send you some info on this. So we're publishing it because every writer that I talk to goes back to the shitty stuff we wrote, whether it was a love letter, a song, a poem that most of the time is so emo, for lack of a better word, like the world is ending and we happen to be on it kind of stuff,
Well, if you're lucky, that's how it should be. If you're lucky, then when you're in your teens, you should not have a worse point of reference. That should be the worst thing that has ever happened to you. Unfortunately, that's not often the case. I do know a number of people who would read those and go, oh, that's cute, compared to the things that they have experienced. But I think that's what's so endearing about teenage angst in in its purest form, is that it is supposed to be, it's supposed to be that, because if your whole world is around whether or not, Jimmy said hi to you by the lockers, that's how it should be.
Yeah. You're not in a bad place really when that happens. It's nice to have an adult around you listen to go, it's gonna get better. Like,
Yeah.
this is not the last point in time.
Well, when you're young, you don't believe that, but I did, have ideas for, these bands that never, these bands that never quite formed. And then when I was a freshman in high school, I got my first little garage band together. And by Mardi Gras, we had a gig. And the things that that the main guy, we're still very good friends, a guy named Steve Karen, who's now an accomplished piano player. He's moved to Portland, Oregon. But he was one of these people who made me a better musician, just because we were the same age. But he wasn't just good for his age; he was just good. We both had a lot to learn with our chops, but that didn't stop him from pushing himself, and he just was always expanding as a musician, and getting to have him to expand. We could sort of expand in tandem. And I remember one day he had written this instrumental, and I was like, we need to put some lyrics to it. We decided we were just going to get out the thesaurus, and
Wow.
because we wanted to sound intellectual, like these bands that we looked up to that used big words. You'll find that my favorite band is Rush.
Oh,
um, and I can't remember what the opening line of this song was. Something like, vexation has corroded all of my expectations. I can't remember what it was. Vexation was the first word, and corroded was in there somewhere. And we thought we were being really avant-garde, and I think we probably sounded more like Monty Python than anything else.
which is brilliant in its own right, even although not intended. But no, I agree. I think, being able to start figuring out how to express yourself as an artist, regardless of what kind of artist you are, the more that that's fostered at a young age, I think it's good, because you have so many roadblocks and people telling you no and you can't and you don't. And, hopefully you do have people telling you, yes, you can and you will, and it grows you. But it's more often than not the other case. And
It is. And I think a lot of people have good intentions, um, because they don't want to see a person get hurt. But you never know what's going to come. It might not even be a grown up. It could be one of your peers. It could be a teacher. It could be some offhand comment. You never know what word of kindness is going to give you that strength when you needed it most.
that is very poetic, especially after the shot I had.
Oh,
Perfectly put.
you've already had a shot?
I did my shot, yes, in the
Okay,
beginning.
well, I'm going to start. I got when the man who is now my husband, we had been seeing each other just a couple of weeks when he had a birthday, and I knew that Prince is one of his big heroes. He is the quintessential New Orleans jazz piano player. So he's written books of transcriptions of the greats like James Booker. I think that's the only book that actually they credited his name for the transcriptions. But Fats Domino, Dr. John, Henry Butler, Professor Longhair. But so he considers himself a jazz geek. His words, not mine. But in the pop world, Prince is his thing. So we're dearly
Prince-
beloved. We're gathered here today to get drunk and
wow.
talk about books.
I actually, people can kind of see one of the t-shirts on my t-shirt quilt behind is a Prince t-shirt, because I literally to this day can repeat every line from the Purple Rain soundtrack. Like,
Oh yeah.
and I had dances. I was 11 when it happened. I had dances. Like, to this day, some of my friends, Jen included, have made fun of me because I still remember the dances. And when they play when we're out dancing, I will do my whole entire When Doves Cry song. Like, it will happen. I can't help myself.
It is interesting when you're young and you're singing Red Corvette, and then as you get older and you continue to sing it and you understand it a little bit more. That was an
Oh, yeah.
interesting moment. You're like, oh, I was 11 when I used to sing this song.
There are things like that. No matter whether they're pop songs or metal songs, I'm like, ooh, oh my, I see what you did there. And then there's the opposite, where there was a preacher who has gone on to have a mega church, and I'm not going to say his name because he does not deserve recognition. But he booked 2 shows at the municipal auditorium in Lafayette, where he got people to flock, and he was talking about all the evils of rock music, everything from on the line of things that were blatantly satanic, like bands like Venom, to things like Eurythmics, because of Annie Lennox's bisexual appearance and Tina Turner showing too much leg. I mean, we've got things going in both things. He put out 2 books that talked about all the different backward masking messages, and of course, it's that psychological phenomenon. There's a word for it. I can't remember what it is, but if somebody says, when we play this record backwards, you're going to hear, I like to eat breadsticks, and then, that's what you're going to hear because somebody's already planted that seed in your mind. So he would say, he would play Stairway to Heaven backwards so that we could all hear My Sweet Satan. And it just sounded like Stairway to Heaven backwards. But I remember just in hindsight, how hysterical it was with him talking about Prince and why we shouldn't buy his records, and listen to this preacher man standing up on the stage with this pulpit in front of him, citing the words to Darling Nikki, as this preacher is saying, I met her in a hotel lobby masturbating with a magazine. And he essentially, I think for a lot of us here, I know I can probably speak for a lot of my fellow Lafayette natives from that generation. He basically put together the best playlist ever. And that's something that's going to be the inspiration for part of the sequel of my first and only book novel thus far. Is there's going to be this crazy evangelist who's talking about the evils of popular music, and of course, I'm going to make him that he's a failed musician himself, which seems like that would be the only logical reason why somebody would do this. But here's that guy,
failed guitar player.
What?
A failed guitar player.
Guitar? Oh, that's awesome. I like the way you think. I may have to incorporate this.
He's secretly working on publicity for the band, because everybody went out and bought Prince. If you didn't know Prince before you went to go see him, you went and secretly bought Prince after to find out what he was talking about.
Oh yeah, well, it's I mean, I think pretty much by this time everyone knew who Prince was, but there were all kinds of cool things that I didn't know about these bands. I'm like, this is awesome.
This is music education, and you can just be like, okay, cool, that works for me.
I ain't mad at it.
No, not at all. Oh, okay, so let's talk about you have done short stories, obviously, short stories. What is your first published work?
Let's see, the very first one, first published work where I was like, wow, I'm officially a published author, was tied in. It had a short story in the back. Some friend of mine who was actually writing by this time, and a wonderful prolific writer, a friend of mine named Austin Malone, who is now one of the editors at Pseudopod, which is a horror podcast. He was the one who, he and his wife Kristen gave me the idea. They said, why don't you just get the ball rolling, start out with a collection of your song lyrics. So that's what I did, and it got things in motion just because I felt like I was doing something. And so I did the book of song lyrics. And at the very end, I did my first short story, which became the prototype for what would later become my novel, The Wild Harmonic.
Awesome.
And so that got things rolling. And then a few things happened all at the same time. It's almost like two parallel events that eventually came together. Just before then, I had made friends with Robert Aspirin, who was living in New Orleans. And I didn't realize that he was living in New Orleans. I had known his myth books when I was younger. And I was on a gig one night. Probably the only thing that came out of this, only good thing that came out of this steady gig was getting to meet Bob, because out of all the steady gigs I played, it was the worst place I've ever been treated. But I'm playing away. I'm doing the best I can, doing this parody song. And here's this guy with a little Al Capone cigarillo and a glass of whiskey, salt and pepper, kinky ponytail, laughing his ass off at the bar, comes up and talks to me, and it's Bob. And so I started to get some ideas rolling with that. And then Bob passed around the same time that a friend of mine named Larry Ashley Jr. Had been seeing some of the posts that I've been making on Facebook. We didn't know each other personally, but he liked my raw observations and occasionally snarky comments and just the wonky lens through which I view things. and added me to a group that was of writers. And so he introduced me to a whole other group of, of things that like with Perseid Press, the Heroes in Hell series. So I did one story with that. So my first 3 or 4 publications were this book that you can still get in ebook only called Mongrels and Misfits. That's my lyric anthology of 6 albums worth of lyrics and some unpublished lyrics. And then this prototype before I even knew how to format a document, or I had no copy editor. Nobody told me that you're supposed to write out the words 42 and not, it just stupid things that I just didn't know until I went out and got a Chicago Manual of Style. So it's an interesting little artifact. So there was Mongrels and Misfits. There was Poets in Hell. Then there was one called Rise of the Goddess, which was a charity anthology that was all supposed to be sort of goddesses reimagined. And a couple of others. There was a series on Moondream Press called Shut Up, which is kind of like an apocalyptic Lovecraftian thing. So those were my earliest attempts. Then expanding to a series, I've got them behind me somewhere, of a shared world, sort of a shared universe called Fortanis. And so I got a few in that way. That's when I started to develop my sort of funny narrative and decided that I kind of liked going the tongue-in-cheek route.
Awesome, though. That is amazing. So you've had this journey. You're also obviously an accomplished musician, which is fantastic, having multiple things you can do, because me and Jen can sing in the car together and have many, many times. We're really good at that. But so when you decide, because it sounds like you went a very artistic route with your life. When was the decision to do that versus, you said your dad was a mathematician. My mom was an accountant, by the way, a CPA. Mm-hmm. Still didn't get the numbers gene. I don't know where the numbers gene went, but it definitely was not to me.
Didn't get to me either, if it makes you feel better. Yeah, I don't think, it's just more like I didn't give myself very many other options. I went to college and I got my degree in music therapy. I did take a year to go to Ireland. I took 3 terms studying at University College Cork, which had a program in traditional Irish music studies and ethnomusicology. And world music is something that I have always loved. And that was at the time that I was really getting into playing Irish music. I had already been playing for a couple of years in an Irish band, and was very lucky to have amongst us a guy who was from Ireland, and probably saved me a lot of faux pas. Is it faux pas? What is plural of faux pas?
Faux pas.
Faux pas. Okay. Anyway, those kept me from. I still had mistakes to make, but there were a lot of things that I luckily already knew what to do and what not to do when I got there. So I did that, and I got my degree in music therapy. But while I was doing that, I was taking like 20 credit hours and then getting on the street and playing 5 nights a week in the quarter. So I was sometimes staying awake for 3 days at a time, which is the kind of stupid shit you can do when you're young.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I could not do it now. But even though I wanted to make the grade and keep the scholarship, my scholarship was on the oboe, which was not my instrument of choice, but my parents did say, if you stick with the oboe, you'll be able to get a good scholarship. And I got probably a better scholarship as a mediocre oboe player. My heart just wasn't into it. I probably got a better scholarship as a mediocre oboe player than I would have if I had been a top-notch euphonium player, which is incredibly unfair. Wow. I felt kind of bad about that, for the people who did put in the time and the dedication and the passion to their instruments. And I'm just like, la, 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 I have a knife. I'm making reeds. Want to see my cool knife?
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I think that's amazing that you have been able to do that. So do you have albums out?
I do. I've got 7 solo albums out, and I've got an eighth that's in the works, which is just really kind of a collection of singles that I released one at a time since 2014. I had been doing the entire albums, things that, with entire albums. And after a while, it didn't make sense. One, because I left New Orleans for a while, went and lived in Starkville, Mississippi, which is where I started developing more writer chops. My grandmother was still alive at age 105, and I decided to take a couple of months to go spend with her. And to say that I took care of her would not be accurate, because in a lot of ways she took care of me as much as I did of her. I did the easy stuff, the hauling things, the driving. She listened, and she gave me insight. And so during that time, I started just commuting back to New Orleans and doing one song at a time, and that's going to be the compilation for these singles. And that I'm hoping to have that out by St. Patrick's Day. So fingers crossed for that.
That's exciting.
I might not have a gig on St. Patrick's Day, but I want to have it out by then. Because
how is the whole pandemic? So you're in a very different position than every other writer we've talked to, because all the writers that we talk to are writers and they can be in their bat caves and, but you have the music is a larger part of the experience. How has COVID been for you?
COVID, it's been well, for one thing, of course it's a horrible, mean, nasty thing, and it's taken the lives of a number of my loved ones, and rendered a lot of friends out of work. I've been one of the lucky ones that I've been able to monetize shows doing live streams. So I've been able to stay afloat purely by the kindness of listeners who have tuned in, and that is something that I definitely don't take for granted. It was also at a time that right before the pandemic, I was getting at the end of my psychological rope, just with how crazy it was getting on the live scene. A lot of the stuff that goes into any fiction that I write about music, at least in a realistic setting, there's going to be a lot of that that's actually not fiction. I had some pretty rough scrapes over the years, just dealing with people in general, like somebody I was setting up for a gig, and somebody I didn't even know, who knew me from Facebook, thought it would be okay to just walk in and throw his arms around me and pick me up off the ground. I've had people show up at my doorstep. I've had a couple of times people parked in my driveway. Just things that are not a whole lot of fun about being out there in public. And right around the time that I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm seriously losing it, and then the pandemic hit. Now I still could not feel relief, because so many of my friends were getting hit a lot harder, because I was sort of like that willow tree that bends and doesn't break. And a lot of people who had stronger careers that depended solely on mass attendances were getting, they're the ones who really got hit hard. So I thought, as long as I'm lucky enough to be able to do this, I'm going to give a little bit, a portion of the proceeds each time to somebody, even if it's just a few bucks, because not everybody is able to do this. I was lucky because I could do a show as a singer-songwriter, whereas if I had become a side person, that would have been a lot harder.
Yeah.
But I was basically doing what I had always been doing, except that nobody was throwing things at me or screaming "Freebird" and stuff like that.
Freebird, like that should actually just immediately end result in an electronic jolt of some.
I have a song. It's on my 6th record that's called Freebird. You can't copyright a title, but just to keep from it being misleading, it's spelled P-H-R-E-E-B-U-R-D with an umlaut over the U to give it some of that 80s toughness. And the entire song is just a snarky response to people who request Freebird. Technically, I am playing Freebird because it is a song called Freebird.
Like it.
I love your humor. You make
So
it
I have
very
a writing question. As a musician, when you're writing, do you listen to music?
Absolutely not. I know other people who probably can. I need absolute silence because I'm going to analyze whatever I'm listening to. I know some people who play music. One of my good friends who's writing this epic children's book um, about people and animals living together, going on this adventure quest in wartime Afghanistan. And he has backdrops that he listens to, but I need absolute silence because I analyze whatever's coming through the senses. I need to be able to hyper focus.
Oh wow. I listen to, believe it or not, Celtic music. That's my thing. Regardless of what I'm writing. I write horror and erotica. So it's not like I'm writing, the great American novel with my Celtic, but Celtic music, for whatever reason, going in the background, even with lyrics, is like so incredibly like soothing to me.
Yeah.
I get distracted if it's quiet because I hear every house settling noise, everything the cats are doing.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah, maybe some sort of white noise would probably work for me, but for the time being, because I get so analytical because music, I can come home from a gig and it takes me a long time to write, to wind down, but because music is still my main source of income, um, I can write and still give myself permission to know that I'm still getting better. I still feel like I have a long way to go before I can really hit that narrative. So, like you said, with horror and erotica, there are um, a lot of horror anthologies I've contributed to, and I was discussing this with Jody Lynn Nye, who was the person who put me in contact with you,
that's
because that's so totally not her bag, and she knows that it's probably not my strongest narrative, but because of all the times in life that things were a little too interesting, it's a way to channel a lot of those demons. I mean, there are other ways that we deal with it, such as copious amounts of drugs and alcohol. Cheers, everybody.
yours.
Um, but it's a way to take things that are, as much as I would not like them to be, there are things that decide that they're going to live rent free in my head for a while. And it's like if I told you, don't think about tugboats, what's the first thing you thought of? Um, so it's a way of kind of literally taking a subject, reframing it, and just working it to death until I'm like, okay, I'm tired of this, bye, and taking the things that are bothering me and reducing them to fiction.
No, I think that is actually brilliant, and I think it's not every every writer that we get to talk to writes differently and comes from a different perspective and pulls their stories from different places and stuff like that. But like when you're talking about things that are happening and stuff, I do a lot of people watching. I have an excessive people watching habit, not in the last year because that's frowned upon and unsafe. But that's where I get a lot of stories because I take what's happening, regardless of which genre we're talking about, and go, what happens when we go and twist? Like this watching people interact, and what happens when you go and then you twist that, whether it's for evil and people are killing people or it goes into a sexual context, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, pulling from that is not a bad idea because I think as writers we get those things in our head and they just sit there until you go blah and you say them, right?
Yeah. Do you do that, Jen?
I do. Same thing.
Yeah.
That was a great contribution, Mr.
I know.
What the hell kind of contribution?
Everything you guys are saying, I'm like, yeah, yes, exactly.
I'm like, would somebody tell this woman to shut up?
Yeah, I know. She butts in all the time. See, what little Jen has not mentioned, Jen is a PhD in English literature. Like, yeah. So she's much better at this.
I'm still thinking about the way that some people can write without any noise. That blows my mind. If there was no noise, I would be listening for things. Like,
yeah, it's just because of of what my background is. Like
Yeah.
after being in the studio, especially if I've been mixing, you get what's called ear fatigue. And it is physically painful to hear music after a certain amount of time because you're taking in so much information. And I think a lot of that is just based on having been a musician for over 20 years before even starting into writing. And now I've been a musician for 30 years. But because when sound is your first is the first thing that you respond to, the absence of sound is just as important.
Yeah.
Because there are times that just like no music, and a lot of times I will drive for hours with just the sound of tires on the road. If I have done, especially if I've done something in the studio the night before, and then I have to hit the road, I need that palate cleanse because there's so much auditory information that I'm processing. Because I've always got some musical project or another on a back burner, and I need to tamper those voices. It's like imagine an eternal earworm.
You're, I was married to a musician for a really much longer than I should have been.
I'm sorry
Um,
for
That's
that.
a separate story. Separate
no,
story.
separate story. But I remember having these discussions with him where he was like, I'm so tired of listening to the sound of the sound is always in my brain and I can't get away from it. So he would need that time to just be quiet. Like we're in the car on a road trip, it just needs to be quiet. I can't
Yeah.
have too many things. So it's just funny. I'm remembering.
My husband does, when people talk about what a great piano player he is, I say, well, he cheats, he practices, but he's at it so much that he needs silence even more when we're on long car trips, including no podcasts or conversations. So I just put on my earbuds if there's something I want to listen to. The thing is he teases me because when we put on podcasts, I fall asleep like that because I have such mental chatter that once there is other speech in the foreground, it puts my own mental chatter in the background, and I'm just like, it has this soporific effect because I don't have those bad little voices, not good enough, not good enough, in the foreground, and all of a sudden, so I'm like totally chilling out to Paula Poundstone.
I love
I
Paula
love it. What was it,
Poundstone.
the lube rack incident? That's what I
Yes,
always
the
think
loop
of.
rack. My favorite Paula Poundstone.
But I think that not just music, and I think this is just a human thing. Whatever you do all day, when you get home or whenever your day ends, whatever that happens to be, like I'll have days, not so much anymore because pandemic, but when I would teach all day long, I'm like, all I did was talk all day. I don't want to say another word. Like just
Exactly. So it's like that you're like if you're just want to wind down with a glass of something, or or a La Croix, or and somebody wants to ask you about Chaucer.
like, I would love to, but not right now.
Yeah, I'm saying my grandfather taught English lit, and Chaucer was his specialty.
It's good times. I do like talking about Chaucer,
Yeah.
but not after I just gave 3 of the same lecture in a row on him. I'm like,
Yep.
I don't need to do it again
Yep.
next week.
Yep. No, I get it. It's we all have that thing that we need to remove ourselves, and it's there might come a time if I do music less and less, because I have been facing some burnout, um, and so we'll see. I've got several things that I'm trying to lay down the groundwork for so that I can keep moving forward. But that might change at some point. But right now, I've had so many years of music being something that I have to hyper focus on that I can't not focus on it when I'm doing something else.
Speaking of that, what are you thinking like moving forward in the future? Because right now you're doing live streaming. Do you think when everybody's vaccinated, is live streaming still going to be a thing the way it is now? What are you leaning?
I don't know, because it'll be interesting to see how much caution people still continue to use. I think the pendulum is still going to swing both ways. There will be people who will continue to mask after the pandemic is under control, because let's face it, people were not getting sick from other things because they were taking such precautions to keep their hands clean and not breathe in icky stuff that there were fewer other nasty bugs that were being transmitted. So it'll be interesting to see. There are certain things that I've realized I don't miss, like restaurants, like crowded restaurants, hearing like lots of being very close to total strangers and things like that, and certain things that I don't miss. I think live music will definitely make a big comeback. As far as me, I don't want to have to go back to where I was with some of my more toxic live situations, that, gigs that I couldn't afford to turn down, but just took a toll on me. And my husband would see I'd come home and I would just be an absolute wreck. Um, there was one guy who was so drunk that he took it, did not take rejection very light, very kindly, and tried to force me at gunpoint to get off the stage and have a drink with him, which, gee, Mr. Know-it-all, that trick never works. That's kind of like saying, does this smell like chloroform to you, as being a good pickup line? It just doesn't work. So luckily, between the bartender and me, we got the situation under control, and the guy left before the police even showed up. But there's that kind of trauma that I had to deal with on a fairly regular basis that I don't want to have to do. I don't want to have to go back to that. And while I've been in under lockdown, I've been laying down some groundwork to get into some better situations with better people. And it might mean a lot of commuting, but I'm willing to do that.
No, it's definitely worth it. Okay, we have to take a quick break. We are going to be right back with Beth.
Sample locally sourced, quality distilled spirits in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. At Skunk Brothers Distillery, we're family owned, brewing small batch grain to bottle spirits, just like our grandfather did back in the Prohibition era. From handcrafted bourbons and moonshine to flavored blends and cordials infused with local fruit. Join us for a tasting tour and buy Skunk Brothers spirits straight from the source.
It's all in the family at Skunk Brothers Spirits, located in Stevenson, Washington.
We're back. We're back. Okay. We were just talking about the Oxford comma and Jen's unappreciative love of that particular topic.
Beth and I are on the same page.
I know you and Beth are on the same page. Jen's been one of my first editors ever, and I just put commas. They're probably in wrong locations sometimes, but I'm like, I'm gonna over comma than under comma, because I'm not gonna hear about how I didn't appropriate comma things.
People use commas like darts. They just throw them in wherever, and they're like, wherever they stick, I'll just.
So it's the Christopher Walken comma.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's funny because one of my beta readers, sometimes I'll throw I'll have my parents read some of my stories, and my mother was looking at one of my early works in progress. It's like, Beth, they're not paying you by the comma.
I think it was William
But
Faulkner
what if you
said
do?
people always gave him grief for not putting in commas, and he said, that's fine, I'll just publish a page of commas and periods at the end, and then everybody can just put them in wherever they want. I think that was William Faulkner.
Wow.
No, I think it's
I wish I could have known. My grandmother grew up down the street from William Faulkner.
Oh, wow.
And in Columbus, Mississippi. So she told me when she was a little girl, she would see, because Faulkner was good friends with his wife's ex-husband. And I think Faulkner was a little tiny man, and the ex-husband was a big hulking man. And the two of them could be seen strolling up and down the street, arm in arm, whispering to each other conspiratorially. I love these stories.
That's great. I know he worked at the post office.
Yeah, I had my grandmother tell me stories, because she also went to college. She was, I think, a year, one grade level behind Eudora Welty, but she went to the same college as Eudora Welty.
Very cool.
And told me stories about her.
Wow. Were they good stories?
Yeah, I mean, they were sad stories, because Eudora Welty did not get along with her family, and she said to her but although I'm trying to think of how this happened, Eudora Welty lived in a dorm, and because this was back when it was safe to do this, it was just eccentric, but a lot of times she would just be seen wandering the campus late at night, just because she needed to be by herself. And when she still lived at home, she would get up at 5 a.m. to write. because after the rest of the family woke up, it was not going to be an optimal writing atmosphere for her. But she said to my grandmother, I envy you because you get to go home, because my grandmother lived in Columbus, and she went to the Mississippi. It's now the MUW, Mississippi University for Women, but it was the MSCW at the time, in Columbus. But yeah, my grandmother knew her.
Wow.
But it was she had a sad life. She wrote some great stuff. And I wonder, when I think about so many people who created such monumental works of art, and they had such terrible lives, maybe it's you think that it's worth it to, like they probably thought it was worth it with what they created, but I bet a lot of those people would probably beg to differ. I know at one point with my songs, I would be okay with being, so much of my music came from my pain, that I'm like, I'd be okay never writing another song again, as long as I could just reach some point of happiness. And I eventually did get that point of happiness, and guess what? I can still write. So, but I had some people who liked my sad songs so much that they were not tactful with me. They forgot that, hey, this is another human being you're talking to. And they would come up and, like, if I had a relationship that failed, they would come up and tell me how happy they were because I wrote my best material when I was hurting, just shit that they would say to my face. I'm like, you wouldn't say that to a woman who's just had her 10th miscarriage, like how happy you are because, it gets, because she puts that angst into her art, it's just, and these are people who did not know to what degree things got ugly, but occasionally things got ugly. And some people said some shit to me.
And you can eviscerate them in fiction, which I think you should.
Guess
Like
what?
Jeffrey Chaucer.
I have.
Good. Jeffrey Chaucer, I will eviscerate you in fiction. I think it's important what you just said too, because, not a lot of authors get to write because it's something that's cathartic and they enjoy it, and it's an artistic art form. Regardless of what you're writing, it's art, right? Well, it's art regardless of how I feel about some of the writing that I read. It doesn't mean you don't need an editor out there, because your art may need a little fucking cleanup.
I absolutely.
Yeah. But I think, it's interesting because I talk a little bit about the celebrity, and you talked about, situations you have. When you put yourself out there as an artist, regardless of what level you are, whether you're Prince or you're somebody who is doing local gigs and stuff like that. And then I'm not saying that's all you're doing, but, somebody who has their first gig, you're an artist and you're a celebrity. And people don't realize that being an artist and a celebrity is very different than the person that you are and what you're going through. And
yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think, it's kind of like, writing different things. People think that's who you are. You write, horror, so you must totally be into the gore and whatever. And regardless if you're a horror fan, right? Because I write horror. I don't write horror because I'm a fan of horror, so to speak, but I am. And Jeff Strand, if you're listening, I love you. But I write it because the human condition is very interesting to me. And I actually am a very large fan of seeing what happens when there isn't a happy ending, because even to the point of what you were discussing, a lot of stories don't have happy endings that go with them.
They don't. I mean, there's a lot of, it depends on the kind of horror. There's certain kinds that I like. I prefer the kind of horror that involves things that can't really happen in real life, because in finishing my music therapy degree, my final requirement was doing a 6-month internship at a psychiatric hospital. And I did music therapy for a lot of people who were survivors of extreme trauma. And once I got to know, I mean, it's the kind of thing that, one, even if there weren't some sort of confidentiality code, one, it's still not my tale for the telling. Two, I don't talk about it because no matter what these people, anybody I talk to, no matter what they think they can and cannot handle hearing about, I'm like, no, if I told you, you would be sorry that you knew this. And I stick to that, but it's also just something that whether there's an expiration date on the confidentiality thing, I don't care. These are things that I'm still taking to the grave. So I'm not interested in speculating on what people can do to other people, unless there's some sort of illusion involved, or there's some kind of unexplained. There has to be some sort of phenomenon that can't happen in real life. That's what I'm more interested in. But it's because so I agree with you about the human condition. But yeah, with the people who can't separate the person from the from the art, I call it sports mascot syndrome. I read an article when I was in my teens about people who were on college or pro level. They were the sports mascots, and how much violence they got subjected to, like, because people would forget there's a person inside that costume, and people who suffered severe injuries from fans getting out of control, or other, teammates from another team forgetting that, there are broken bones under that big stuffed animal that you guys think you're knocking around. And I think that's what happens when your product is out there. People mistake the product for the person. Because I do this act as an alter persona, Bad Beth and Beyond, where I wear a wig and I have this snarky attitude, and it's a platform. Like the way that authors will take a nom de plume, even though everybody knows who they are. It's a way to separate one genre from the other, because if I put my dirty songs on my serious albums, that does something to the rest of the album. So if people say, what album is Show Me on the Doll on, I can point them to this separate entity. And I know that there are writers who do that, like Shauna McGuire writes horror under a different name, even though she makes it no secret. But it's a good way to say, oh, a book about fairies, Morgan Freeman narrator voice, but it was not a book about fairies. It's a good way to keep those separate and distinct. I think that's very smart. But when I do the dirty songs, if something bad would happen to me on gigs, a lot of people who I thought would know better would say, well, what do you expect? You do dirty songs. I'm like, that doesn't give people the excuse. What about this body act that you love to listen to at this Ren Fair, this body comedian that you like to hear? Do you think they deserve that treatment?
That's the treatment thing too, that you dressed due to, like that rolls into the other things. Like, it's because of how you dressed or how you looked, or you were friendly. The whole you were asking for it situation.
Well, Neil Peart put it very perfectly in his song Limelight. There's a Rush song for every occasion. One must put up barriers to keep oneself intact. And I was recently dealing with this. I was telling a friend of mine about what I call the verbal bop on the shoulder, like people who get over familiar when we haven't met. Like, it's different, like with my friends, or, the way that you suss out your boundaries with people that you're getting to know. But if people start right out, I'm like, who the hell is this person? Just like if they came up and physically like bonked you on the shoulder, you'd be like, don't touch me. As opposed to somebody that you know really well. But there was one person who told me, sorry, but sexual harassment is part of your job description. The stage is no place for a hemophiliac, and if you don't like it, you should quit music. Guess who's going to get killed in my next story?
I hope him.
Yes.
That's the liberating thing about writing fiction, is that if I have frustration in one thing, I can get it out in another, and it keeps me balanced.
I love that. I actually have a shirt that my boyfriend bought me that said, like, it says something like, warning, be careful what you say to me. I'm going to kill you in my next story. Like,
but yeah.
Yeah.
And the nice thing that is fun to do too is I pay tribute to my friends. And I first got Tuckerized. Bob Aspirin mentioned me in his first book in his Dragon series. And then when he died and Jody Lynn Nye took up the series, she Tuckerized me, making an entire scene take place at one of my gigs. She had me down pretty well. Here's the scary thing. She and I had never met in person yet. She had never seen one of my shows.
Oh, wow.
She had never, we had never conversed on the phone. But because she's Jody Lynn Knight, she could do this.
Yes.
She's got this imagination that blows me away. But I've found that the flip side to this is that it makes me feel good when I can pay tribute to my friends, and so I've done that recently in some of my stories, either by name or by fictional characters who resemble them, and it's fun because my friends get a kick out of that.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what it's like to have a friend put you in a story. No, not mentioning names, but I'm in a trilogy thanks to Jen. Yeah,
Nice.
it's not flattering. It's not flattering at all.
It's you.
It is, but it's flattering.
I need to, I feel like I need a box of popcorn here. I'm just watching, for people who are only getting an auditory experience on a podcast and are not watching this on video. I'm watching the two screens light up going back and forth. And I just want to sit and have my popcorn here. I would love to know more of this. It's like, I'm done talking.
Yeah, why don't you explain this? Because it's fantastic.
Yeah, tell me.
I wrote a story based on a game that we played together, based on a character. We played D&D for years. And one of my characters, the group was based on a group of characters, and I just took Erica's character from that game and I just put her in my book, and she's always there. She's snarky and she gives advice when you need it. Like, my characters are dumb and they make dumb choices, and she's in the background going, that's dumb, you should probably not do that. And then at the end, she takes my hero and stands it back up and is like, no, you need to go do the thing. So it's you. It's wonderful.
I think that's, we all have that one snarky friend. I can think of mine right off the top of my head, who does not mince her words. She was born in Germany, so she does not mince her words. But she also tells me the absolute truth sometimes when I'm not ready to hear it, but I need to hear it anyway.
So I appreciate that. The funny part was I'm reading the book because she gave me the book and I'm reading it and I'm looking at this character and I'm like, oh, this character's pretty bitchy. And I'm like, wait a
You
minute.
say that like it's a bad thing.
It's very flattering. It was just very funny because I'm partway through the book and I texted her and I'm like, is Lyra me? Is that me? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like,
like, what would Erica say? That's what Erica would say. Okay, good.
You see,
it is very flattering.
They say that people don't recognize themselves in books. Jody and her husband Bill were giving me an example, and I wouldn't know the person that Bob Asmer was referring to, but and I don't even remember the exact passage, so I'm not going to say it, but he gave a very unflattering depiction of somebody who was probably less than a savory character, and I was worried about, I wonder about this and that, if people are going to recognize. And they said, no, trust me, like if it's really, if we're dealing with unsavory characters, then they're probably going to be narcissists, and they're probably not going to know that this very bad thing that's being depicted is about them. Erica, with you not being a narcissist, but being like actually caring and giving good advice, you're going to be more tuned into that. But people who are getting slammed are probably going to be none the wiser. So I put this theory to the test. And I did this. My college roommate corrected me when I said took some balls. My college roommate said, no, you have to say oves. I'm like, okay. So I worked up the oves. But one of the main characters in the story, who was this doddering, self-indulgent fool, and dies a horrible death as a direct result of his self-indulgent doddering choices and everything like that. I made it in the image of the person to whom I was submitting the story.
Oh.
5 minutes later, I got it back. I love this story. This is great. Let's do it. Wow. I did just to put this theory to the test. And,
I think that's pretty true. I am actually flattered. I do love the character. It was just very funny because in the beginning part of the series, her bitch level is up to it's a peak. Like, Stop being
Actually,
nice, Jen. Stop
So-
being nice.
So basically, what I'm hearing is that I really want to like sit down and drink with you guys more, because everything that I'm hearing just sounds admirable as fuck.
Oh, thank you. And it's fun. Jen's actually in one of my books as a character too. She knows exactly who she is, and she actually edits the book. So luckily she doesn't change her character very much. But I think, paying homage, and again, life experiences, I think can be very interesting. It can be cathartic to like to kill a character. We're not going around killing people because that's frowned upon and illegal in most places. And it doesn't actually result in anything good for you. You're generally traumatized if you do that. But being able to go, you know what, you kind of deserve this. I'm going to put you in a fictional situation, and you totally deserve about what's about to happen to you.
Well, the thing is, you don't have to kill somebody to feel better, because you could think, okay, what is the worst thing that could happen to this person? And it might not be death. Coming full, this is like a comedic callback, because when we were talking about the guy who now has the mega church, he was like talking about the evils of rock music. There is a person who did a lot of damage in my life. I still have the occasional nightmare, who caused some physical harm and a lot of property damage and financial ruin. And what I'm thinking of, okay, who is the person who is hindering my main character? What sort of unsavory person can we put in this path that my main character has to overcome? Oh boy, I just had a nightmare about this douchebag. Okay, fine, whatever. But we're not going to kill him. We're going to make him his own worst nightmare. I'm friends with plenty of people, for instance, who are atheists. And a friend of mine who's a minister said they're wonderful people because they do things just because they want to do the right thing and not because any scripture told them so. This person is flat out iconoclastic. If you were to tell this person out of good intentions, if you told this person, I'm going to pray for you, instead of saying, thank you, that is very nice that you're thinking nice thoughts of me, this person would just, just
Oh, wow.
carry you a new one because you dared to, to speak about a religion that he did, he eschews. So he's not going to die. He's going to be made in the image of my crazy evangelist.
I love that. I love it. I love it. I love it. I enjoy you. I want to talk about virgins.
Oh, well, I don't have much to say on this. Oh, you mean the book, right? Do I
Yeah.
have- Oh, look, I have it on my bookshelf behind me.
Let's talk about virgins. So
Is
the
this
book
is this going to show up backwards on YouTube?
nope, it's showing it perfectly. Release the Virgins. Let's talk about your book there.
Right. This is an anthology. There have been one of three anthologies that that I'm the proudest of, and they were all edited by the same person, somebody whom I have not yet met in person, a guy named Michael A. Ventrella, who is a wonderful writer himself, and created these wonderful anthologies. And this one came from being late night at a con, bunch of people sitting around drinking until some ridiculous hour in the morning. And one of the people at the table had been, I think, studied entomology. I could just look at what the backstory is. Do you want me to actually read the foreword?
You can totally read the foreword. This is your podcast. You can do whatever you want to.
Oh, do not tell me that. But this is short, but it says it was from Ian Randall Strock, who is the publisher. Said he writes, "Did you ever have one of those late night conversations with a bunch of erudite friends, and one of them says something that sounds so incredibly clever that the rest of you start to build on it, and it turns into an idea that you all adopt as the next really big thing? Of course, in the morning when everybody wakes up and sobers up, the idea turns out to be not really quite so wonderful. Some background. We were sitting at a table in the bar. It was late on the third night of a 4-day convention. Heidi caught a fruit fly, and I said, Drosophila melanogaster, its Latin name. Thomas translated that as dew lover dark belly. That led him to reminisce about his time as a biology student, and at one point in the fruit fly's life cycle, he had to release the virgins. Michael said, I can turn that into an anthology. Thomas said, I can do that cover. And then I scratched my chin and said, I think I can publish that. Gail and Hildy seemed to come up with ideas for stories telepathically, and now here we are. So you never know what random thing is going to actually be a good idea. So the requirement for this particular book is that every story has to contain the phrase "release the virgins."
Oh wow! I love it, and your song is amazing for this.
Thank you. That was a labor of love. I just wanted to do it just to do it. The company did not ask me to, but Mike was talking about the anthology, and I was just brainstorming, and I said, imagine to the tune of Beast of Burden, I'll never read release the virgins. You know, he said, how about change it to you've got to read Release the Virgins. And by the way, I want a song about that. So I said, okay. So what happened was he gave me the arc before it was ready for anybody else to see it. So I read everybody else's stories and incorporated at the end where the Stones say, she's so pretty, 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 pretty. You know, I used that almost in the style of We Didn't Start the Fire to grab something from every single story in this book.
It's a brilliant song. It seems like a campy song, but it is just brilliant. And I love that all the authors chimed in too. Like that was
the authors chiming in. That happened before the video. And it was before my story was even accepted, because it started out, it was a Kickstarter thing. So there were a set number of authors whose stories were already like, yes, okay, you're in. We'll get this out, and then we'll have some open slots after the fact for whoever wants to contribute. And once it was funded, they were able to open some slots for some people who are still trying to make their way in the writing world, yours truly being one of them. And but the whole Release the Virgins, you know, that montage of people saying that happened before it. And so we put that into the story. But I basically, for people who don't know what I'm talking about, if you go to YouTube and look up my name, Beth Patterson, Release the Virgins, you'll find it, where I'm singing about this book. And, you know, just this fun little, I guess it could technically count as filk, even though it's also kind of a little commercial, but a way to pose. My story was called Are You There Cthulhu? It's Me, Judy. And part of that, I'd had an idea of Are You Cthulhu? It's, you know, and it was a composite of several things. I got the basic idea in the back of my head at LibertyCon several years ago. And we were talking about our earliest writings. And I said, I was in the 6th grade when I wrote my first book, which meant that I got a five subject notebook and just filled it from cover to cover. And it made no sense. And it had no story arc. It was beyond, I was not a plotter. I was not even a pantser. I was more of a shit your pantser. I mean, it just went from point A to point Q, but I was writing, and they say that people emulate whatever they're reading at the time. And so what I was reading was Judy Blume and Walter Farley with the Black Stallion books, and Stephen King. So mine was kind of like a cross between Pet Sematary and Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and the Black Stallion. And the end result was this book that I had written, and it was so cheesy. I think it was Jason Cordova, wonderful writer, who was at the same, sitting at the same table, who said, Beth, please tell me you're going to turn that into something someday. And that took it out of my permanent files and put it into my shelf for deliberate cheesiness. And the extra layer was that a friend of mine, Gwendon Alexander, who's a wonderful poet, suggested this because we're mutual friends of the writer Judith Tarr, who writes just amazing historical fiction and she keeps Lipizans. She raises Lipizan horses.
Oh.
And only recently, Jody and I had gone to stay with Judy. She does the thing called Camp Lipizan for just pennies. You can stay at her house. It's a great place for riders to ask any questions they want about horses in their riding, because there's a lot of irresponsible equestrian riding going on. Like somebody might have galloped all day on the back of a horse. You can't do that. The horse will die. You know, we're talking about a horse that's over 20 hands high, you know, just ridiculous shit. So if you want to know what it's really like to write from equestrian perspectives, Judy will take the time out to answer all of your questions, and you get to pet lots of noses and actually get to ride her Lipizans. And so Gwendon suggested, you know, I was toying with this concept, and Gwendon said, let's change it to It's Me, Judy. And instead of the horse, I forget what kind of horse it was originally supposed to be, she said, make him a Lipizan. I'm like, that's a great idea. So Gwendon, I had this rough idea, and Gwendon's extra boop took it to a much more personal level, where I got to incorporate Judy in there. I got to incorporate a Lipizan in there, and I got to make it a much more personal experience than me just ragging on my own writing when I was in the 6th grade.
I'm telling you, I want some of the 6th grade writing to go into our teen angst anthology.
Let's keep, you know, because I was recently posting as something that I had to do a lot of research about Beethoven for a forthcoming horror story. Horror is, like I said, it's not my first choice narrative, but I get so much good stuff out of it. It's like, as long as that turnip is still bleeding, I'm still going to get that blood out of that damn turnip.
I'm there with you.
So I did a lot of research about Beethoven, and when he was, I think 14, you know, 14 or 15, something like that, he wrote one of his earliest compositions was called Elegy on the Death of Poodles. And then I listened to it, and it sounded like a perfectly good early 19th century composition. I'm like, when I was his age, I wrote a punk song that had the word peckerhead in it. So it's like, it's like, you know, I will never be that young Beethoven that wrote an elegy on the death of poodles. On the other hand, maybe Beethoven would have wanted to incorporate peckerhead in there, because he was, you know, he could be pretty thorny.
Yeah, born at a different time. I kind of wonder what would happen. You know, you have the musical geniuses that are born, and you end up with Justin Bieber, who's not bad. And I'm not bagging on Justin Bieber, because he's actually incredibly talented, but that's kind of the direction somebody as a child that can play like 20 different instruments goes.
Well, I'm trying to look at it from all sides, because long before I actually got to the age that I am now, which it's no, I'm not going to make it a secret. I'm about to be 48. I figured that age.
High five. That's both of us.
Okay.
Yep. You're good. Jen's high fiving a year behind us, but she's high fiving. So
I'm, you know, I figured like, there's no point in stigmatizing something that should not be stigmatized. This is a youth worshiping society, but I think of my 105-year-old grandmother, who had so much knowledge to share. And even at 105, she had the best legs of anyone in the family. I mean, she was badass. When she was 99, we went hiking and she kicked my ass.
I believe that.
So it's age really is just a number. But I was thinking to myself, the difference between an old person and an old fart. An old person might not necessarily understand the next generation. An old fart refuses to understand. So I'm trying to see what's going on, because in the music industry, you have to know what's going on and what different audiences are responding to. That being said, I read an interesting article that somebody wrote about how music, popular music, started to decline in its composition and its structure. That was directly correlated to music programs in schools being defunded.
I believe that.
And I
totally believe that.
There are a lot of things that I wrote as a singer-songwriter, not as a composer and arranger, but as a simple singer-songwriter, that were definitely influenced by the things that I played as a mediocre oboe player. But it's the music that, not just being, you know, learning that music, but learning one voice and hearing all the individual voices as the conductor is saying, okay, do this, do that, and and hearing it all fit together and being around all those other instruments. Um, and I grieve for the people who don't get a chance to experience that. Even if it's not going to be your career, if it's not going to be what you're supposed to be when you grow up, there's a certain camaraderie that you never forget.
I agree. I played trumpet in school, not for very long. My mom said it was too loud. It was very loud, but my mom said it was way too loud.
So
Yeah.
trumpets are supposed to be loud.
Yeah, no, I don't know what she expected when she said I could go out for band. I think she should have clarified the list of, except I should have probably, here's the list of instruments, Mom. Choose the 5 that are okay to bring home. So I did trumpet for a while, but I also did drama and theater, which is kind of cut out of some schools too, like the drama classes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that took a very, very shy, nobody would guess that. I mean, anybody who meets me and I go, I was so shy as a child is like, right, that's sure. But I was paralyzingly shy as a child, and it brought me out of my shell. So even if I was paralyzingly shy in the hallways, I would get on stage and do, Macbeth and be totally fine doing Macbeth on stage. And then I'd go back into my shell when I was up until my teenage years, actually.
Well, it makes sense. It gives you a chance to get your yayas out. And like anything, like on a gig, when I've got that screen, when I've got my main instrument is a bouzouki, which is an Irish adaptation of a Greek instrument of the same name. It's a completely different thing. You've got that buffer. It's unfortunately that same buffer that people think, that makes people think that they can come at you like a sports mascot. But yeah, it's so important. Any kind of expressive arts are so important for young people. And I really hope that we see a resurgence of that. And whether or not that affects the direction that modern music is taking, that's not my place to say, but I think that everybody deserves to have a chance to experience it.
I agree.
If it's not their thing, that's fine, but at least
exposure to different arts. But education is moving towards practical application, and if it doesn't get you a job, no one thinks or seems to think that it has any value.
Oh yeah.
So art and music and literature are kind of, we'll swing back, we usually do, but right now we're on a hard, like, practical skills. We don't need you to be a good human or think critically.
But I will say the advent of reality shows, because we have to wrap up soon, but the advent of the reality shows like The Voice and America's Got Talent and things like that. And I will say this about the internet and the ability to look up and see how to do things and learn how to do things and watch people how to do things. Like, I think because I couldn't look up how to be a good trumpet player when I was a kid easily. Not that I've necessarily been successful at being a trumpet player, but there's not as many avenues to look up. There's not podcasts that talk about things. There's not, like, even writing now, is way better than when Hemingway was doing it, because you have all these people that are talking about how to do it well. There's all this community around things like that. And I'm not saying it's perfect. Don't get me wrong. I could go on a whole tangent for hours about the internet, but the fact is I think that even though it's not in school, and I really wish it was, there are other avenues for people to get the opportunity to explore artistic sides of them. Even like I was telling a friend of mine today, I am addicted to drag video. I love drag queens. It's Jen will tell you this in a heartbeat. I love drag queens.
That's awesome.
I'm so jealous of all of their makeup all of the time. But I could watch for hours them do their makeup and create these unbelievable things. And I know if you go back to our age, I get to say that because we're very close. You go back to our age, kids our age didn't have that. Like, they had some role models, but they didn't have the ability to find people that were just like them and show them how to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
We all learned makeup from Maybelline. You know what I mean? Like, let's start with the blue and the pink eyeshadow from the 80s. Like, that totally happened. And we emulated that versus somebody going, let me explain contouring. Like, I don't know about you guys, but when contouring was finally explained to me, I was like, wow, I totally would have messed that up if doing it myself any point.
You see, when I was your age, we had to learn how to put on makeup through telegraph. And we were grateful. That was, by the way, the majority of that was not musically correct, but rhythmically correct, was for YYZ or YYZ if you're Canadian there, Jen. This is why we come back to my favorite band, Rush. Their big instrumental YYZ starts out in Morse code for YYZ, which is the code of the Toronto airport. Jen is sitting there nodding.
My husband, yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah, no, her husband and I have been friends since I was 14 years old. So that's a really long time that we've been friends. That's a longer story for another time.
All of the things except knowing that the band is named Rush.
Yeah.
He would know Morse code, the Toronto airport, all of that. And then he would be like, oh yeah, is that Rush? Is that the name of the band? He's musically clueless.
Yeah.
He also speaks French randomly in conversation if he doesn't remember the English word, and then continues as if anyone has any clue what he's talking about.
Well, my mom does that. If she can't think of the word, she'll say it in French, and I will occasionally do that, but because my French is not a strong enough of a second language, there's no telling what's going to come out of the other language hat. So I spent a year studying Japanese, like teaching myself. I didn't have a teacher, but I teach myself Japanese because I knew I wanted to go play in Japan. And when I got to Japan, I was like, yeah, I got this. And then all I could speak was French. But it was, there's no telling what is going to come out because I took a year of modern Irish Gaelic. I had years and years of French. And then I, of course, grew up hearing it around me before I actually had any formal classes. Now I'm trying to teach myself Spanish. I taught myself some very basic last minute Khmer before my husband and I went to go play in Cambodia. So all these weird things will just pop up. There's English and then there's everything else.
Well, you are a better person than me because I deal with people all around the world in my different offices, and I joke and they laugh at me all the time. I'm like, the American English version of this is blah, and it's nowhere close even to my UK friends. They're like, that's not the word for that. I'm like, listen, in America, we speak American, okay? So
it's the times that I've been in Ireland and Scotland and England and Australia, it's like you learn really fast. You'd better learn the differences because when the differences between the two sometimes can go way off. I mean,
I agree. We joke all the time because they'll say a word, like they say that you have what is the word they use? We're going to have to wrap this up in a minute, but they use a word for, they had an intimate, was it intimate? But the way they were saying the word, like an intimate I'm like, stop saying that. That means something different, and don't say that. Don't say those words. And then I was joking about, I love British tea. Tea is and Jen, we're like tea addicts. So I found this tea when I was visiting our UK office and I love it. And I joked about actually having tea and crumpets over there because I actually found a place that served crumpets. They're like, stop saying crumpet. And I'm like, why? And because a crumpet is somebody you kind of have, here we go, dalliance with, because they don't say an affair. And they're like, you have to stop saying crumpets the way you're saying crumpets. It's inappropriate when you're talking like.
Oh man, that sounds like an invitation to go crumpets, 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 crumpets. No, did I say crumpets? I meant to say Krampus.
Yeah.
But, no, that just sounds like a challenge. That sounds like a gauntlet thrown.
For me, yes, but since I do HR for a living, I have to be like, okay, fine, I won't say crumpets. How about scones? Scones.
Yeah, well, I thought, in my mind, a crumpet and a scone are two different things.
They are different, but yeah, because I can't, I'm like, biscuit, what is the word I use? They're like, we're not discussing this with you. Oh, and I'm like, fine. So when I'm there again, you're going to give me a crumpet.
And then you're going to play your trumpet.
Yes. Oh God, I would love to try that in. Okay, so as we're wrapping this up, tell people how to find you, not in the inappropriate way. How do people find your music? How do people find your writing?
They're not going to find me in the inappropriate way. I'm very much in an undisclosed location, but website is bethpattersonmusic.com. My Facebook page, the handle is Bethodist. I'm trying to start my own religion. I don't really care what you do as long as you're not douchebags to each other. And, I'm just in it for the tax write-off.
Love it.
The Facebook page, the handle is Bethodist. And what else have I got? Bandcamp, which has, my Amazon author page is also Beth W. Patterson. I use the middle initial because there are other, my name's pretty common, and there are other people who have written shit by the name Beth Patterson. And not that I totally wouldn't want to steal all the glory for myself, but I'm not going to accept credit where it's not due. So it's Beth W. Patterson on Amazon authors. For music, Bandcamp is bethpatterson.bandcamp.com. My whole digital catalog is there. And I can't think of anything else to say.
I think we just sum up with Release the Virgins.
Release the Virgins. It was so nice meeting you both. I can't wait till this pandemic is over because I totally want to have a drink with you guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been Drinking with Authors. I've been Erica Lance.
J.M. Piquette.
And we'll see you next time.